You're listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series.
Welcome to the studio, welcome to the microphone, Supreme Court Judge David Ashton Lewis.
Well, as always, thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here, and I hope the listeners today will find enjoyment in what we talk about. I missed yesterday, or 2 days ago, pardon me, I'm getting old, but you know, we did ask at the end of the last break, can you give us some ideas? Well, I wasn't able to be there, but you have received some really good ideas. So can we at the start encourage listeners, if you enjoy the shows, and you appear to, please think up topics you would like Colin and I to speak on. Now, I want to make something else clear. This show is not just about the judge, me. This show is about Colin and the judge. He is as much a part of what we produce every Thursday. It's his thinking, it's his input. So please, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure you do, it's not about me, it's not about my mind. Colin, he is brilliant. I mean, any man who's achieved what he has achieved, and of course, he's quite rare because being scientifically based, I have found very good doctors, very good engineers, are not very interested in abstract thinking like philosophy or history. Now, Colin really jumped at when people wanted us to do the shows on Aristotle, Plato, or Socrates, Aristotle and Plato. I thought they would go nowhere. They would be boring. Well, I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, because you have made a great endorsement of those. And that's why we say, will you please think of areas that you would like Colin and I to speak on?
And look, no idea is too silly an idea. We go back to the university ideologies. If you don't understand something, and I remember I was approached at a coffee house, and could you get David Ashton Lewis to explain left and right wing in fundamental terms? Now, we did do a show on that, and even I learnt one or two little items. It's amazing, even though you'd say to yourself, hey, well, I completely understand that, that you always pick up a tip or a trick or a viewpoint that you hadn't considered in the past. So no idea is too silly. I will preface that with we're not going to get into political table tennis, for want of a better term. No. So I think we had someone say, could you get David Ashton Lewis to talk about the despicable Labor Party, and there was something about a Liberal Party. We're not going to touch those things. That's not what we're about here. That's opinions that you need to form for yourself.
Yes, all we'll do is lay out what the left of centre in a centrist democracy is, what they believe in, what they promote, and what right of centre in a centrist democracy believes in and promotes. And you've raised a really interesting point. As a young barrister, obviously I had to be a year under, even though I was a barrister and I could argue in any court, I was new, and you had to have, when I did it, what was called a pupil master, and that had to be a barrister of at least 10 years standing, but could not be, in those days, a Queen's Counsel. Had to be what was known as a middling or a senior junior. And I had a really good one, and that man is still at the bar today as an elderly man, and I'm told still as good as he was. And he gave me a very good bit of advice at the beginning of my time in his chambers. And he said to me, David, don't ever be afraid to ask the stupid question, because you may find that others have been too afraid to ask it. And that happened to me a couple of times. So, yes, no matter what the topic is, we won't go into party politics.
No.
Now, one of the compliments I've received a number of times is how I'm supposedly balanced. I give give one.
Supposedly.
Yeah, well, supposedly, and on air,
Yes.
I must be balanced.
Absolutely.
This is a democracy, and it's made up of people who are rigidly on the left, rigidly on the right. All I will do is explain both positions, and as you said, Colin, we'll leave it up to the listener to make their own decision.
Just like a normal election, you
Yes.
are asked to weigh up both sides of
Yes.
offering and make a decision for yourself. Don't follow a crowd, just
No.
make a decision for yourself.
No,
So,
you're
and that is
right.
the aim of the program. So today we did talk about at our Tea and Talks, and David, I mentioned the process. One of the questions was, how do we come up with the topics? And I said, well, I'll give you for instance. Monday morning, I rang David, and David said, got nothing this week. What have you got? And I said, well, I'm about the same. So we then talk about the
Donald Trump.
Well, we talk about the news of the week, and
Yes.
we talked about Donald Trump and him making the sensationalistic statement that he's going for a fourth term. We know that he's only won 2 terms, but he's claiming that one that he lost in the middle that he won, so it's a fourth term in his eyes. And then we moved on to how the Constitution changes, and David mentioned that there were 40-odd constitutional amendments put forward in Australia, and only X amount got up.
Yes.
And I went, I didn't know that. Let's talk about that. That's a fantastic topic. And that's often how our topics come together.
And if we can have help from you, because this really came out of you. I mean, Donald Trump has got, if he's serious in this, he has a massive hill in front of him, because the US Constitution was changed, I think, in the late 1940s, that said a presidential term was restricted to 2 terms because of Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt won 4 direct terms, and for as popular as he was, there were those who got to the point by 1944, sadly, when Roosevelt died, oh God, no more of him. You know, the same with Churchill. Churchill was this great figure, and yet he lost to Clement Attlee in 1945. So
Did a wonderful job through World War II.
brilliant job, the both of them.
The people felt they needed a change after the war.
And unlike the third great member of that coalition, the Soviet Union, well, Joseph Stalin didn't have to worry about being re-elected. He was there till he died. And, of course, he died in 1953. So that's a fundamental difference between our form of government. You have to win the will of the people. In a police state or a socialist state, once you get into power, it's you who decides, not the people. So, yes, let's do today.
So
all right, I can... Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
Let's start with my impressions, and I'd like to hear yours. When
Yes.
I was very young. I can't remember whether I'd finished school or I'd just started uni, but at the time I decided, okay, I need to understand the document that we base our entire society on.
Yes.
So I started reading, and I thought to myself, well...
And you got bored, witless.
I went, well, okay, I can sort of see that it's a framework.
Yes.
But no one part of this can stand alone. It is all part of a larger foundation, for want of a better term.
If you thought that, you were advanced.
So that's what I thought, but it's a boring read.
It is a boring read.
From your point of view, though, David, I would imagine that you would have had a very, very different viewpoint of the document.
Yes, I really studied it when I was 17 in my year 12 in political science at school. And I found it was certainly dry, but I found that I could think beyond that and think, why did our founding fathers produce this document on January the 1st, 1901? And basically, one of the difficulties that a lot of people find with the Australian Constitution, it doesn't read like the US Constitution or the French Constitution.
No.
The German and Italian constitutions are somewhat similar, but even they go a bit further. Our Constitution is an administrative document, and it sets out the basis of the governance of the Commonwealth of Australia and the relationship between the constituent parts of that Commonwealth, called the states, their powers, and the powers of the one Commonwealth government, and everything. Challenges are read against that. It's not like the US Constitution. So I think the best way to remind people, one, it is quite dry, and I don't blame people if they haven't read it, but they really should, because we're all Australians. And probably you'll find more people are reading it in the Indian, Chinese, Muslim, Pacific Islands communities because they're new and they want to know. But to know that this document regulates the relationship between Australia and the states, and you've heard me say this before, you and I really have two identities. We are both Australians and we are Queenslanders. We're not Victorians, we're not New South Welshmen, and therefore...
But if I move to New South Wales,
Yeah.
I am now a New South Welshman.
You are, and you should, if you've read it, and I don't blame you if you haven't, but now things will impact upon you as a New South Welshman, and vis-a-vis the Commonwealth and vis-a-vis the other states. So that's why it's not the most interesting of reading, but sadly it is the most important reading. So we're talking about Donald Trump, and you raised how he wants to, and I said, well, he's going to have to amend the U.S. Constitution. Now, to get that, it's impossible. He won't get it.
Very difficult needle to thread, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, it's even more difficult because there's been 45 attempts since 1901 to amend the Australian Constitution, of which 8 have been successful. And only 3-4 of those 8 are really major. The other ones have been changing stamp duty amounts on importation or taxes and things that affect everyone as an Australian.
Sure.
But the most important ones are simply 1967, when Aboriginals, Indigenous Australians, were clearly recognised and were taken into account in the polarity, the populace of Australia, full citizenship, and under the Constitution, and the ability to amend it, and the right to vote.
So let's understand that, David. You're saying prior to that they weren't counted as Australians?
No, they weren't.
They didn't have a say as Australians?
That may not be totally right, but whatever say they had was easily just dismissed because they were not looked upon as a developed people. There was always the view that the Aboriginal is an undeveloped tribal person.
Yes.
And their ability to affect or to take part in the governance and the place of a modern developed Western nation was minimised. Well, 1967 changed that, and that won hands down.
And to me, that's the start of inclusionism.
Oh, yes,
And
you're right.
and at times when we talk about, and we have talked about in the past, where we see that group being tried to be segregated,
Yes.
voice to Parliament would probably
Well, let's
be.
go up to that.
Yes.
So you had this recognition in 1967, if I can put it in the simple, these people are just us. They're Australians. They have a say, they have a voice, and it should be respected. It should be listened to like any voice of any Australian.
Sure.
And then we get to 2023, when that thinking mainly had progressed to the fact that they were are the indigenous people of this continent, and they should be recognised in that regard. But because they are so small, they should have special privileges. And of course, one of those privileges was a voice to Parliament, which really translated into a fourth chamber of Parliament called the Aboriginal Voice, that only Aboriginals could vote for. Now, remembering when we were doing this a couple of years ago, the official government statistics are that there are 881,000 Aboriginal Indigenous Australians, and it's marked from full blood up to 1/24th. And so the full blood component was 278,000 out of a population of 26 and close to 27 million people. Now, the size is irrelevant. It's, well, here were the full-blood Aboriginals, and they mainly lived on the stations in the outback.
Sure.
And then it went right up to 1/24th. But what caused myself and others difficulty was a number of things. You can't add another voice or another chamber to the Australian Parliament without clear acceptance by the people, because you're going against the basis of our and other Western nations that came out of the Age of Enlightenment, that there are three chambers: executive, which in our case is the Governor-General or the monarch. In a congressional case, it's the president. Is a president with powers. You then have a second chamber, and that is the legislative chamber, and that chamber is the body that makes the law. You then have a third chamber, and that is the judicial, and that's made up of, in the US sense, 9 Supreme Court judges, in our case 7, and their job is really to view what legislation has been passed and compare it to this administrative document and say, no, it's not repugnant to the governance of the Commonwealth of Australia, or to say it is. Now, the first arm of government, which I just mentioned, is one person, and that is the president if you're in a non-royal one, or it is the Governor-General. Yet that Governor-General really has only 2 functions, and that is to act on the advice of the head of the second chamber, that is the Prime Minister, and then to sign a bill into law, because nothing can become law in the Commonwealth or in the states unless the Governor or the Governor-General puts their signature on it. It's not law. And so naturally, over the centuries, 99% of the time, that head of state will just automatically sign. But we did have in Australia in 1975 when Sir John Kerr refused. And he ultimately then, under his reserve powers, he dissolved the Parliament, which the head of state can do, and issued writs to go out and say we're going to have another election, to give again the most important aspect. It's really a 4th or a 5th chamber. It's called the people. And they then could have a vote.
Forgive me, David, remind us what it was that the Governor-General wouldn't sign into law.
Well, let's come back to that. Let's just keep on what we have. And so what happened in 2023, and again, to amend the Constitution in Australia is one of the most difficult things. So you have to first have the question agreed on by both the opposition and the government. They agree, yes, this is the question that should go to the people. They then have to have a joint sittings of both the House of Representatives and the House and the Senate, and by a majority, simple majority, they say, yep, we agree to this. That question then has to go to all of the states, because remembering again, we are both Australians and we are Queenslanders. So the Founding Fathers wrote in that the question must go out, and here's the hard bit, that at the end of the day, at least 4 of the 6 states there must be a majority in 4 of the 6 saying, yep, we approve of it. And it must be then a 50.1% of all Australians to do it. Now, the great thing about the Voice, it's one of the 3 major amendments that went before the people, and it failed. 63% of Australians and 6 of the states and 1 of the 2 territories said no.
Yes.
Only the ACT said yes. So there's never been a result like that ever, not even in 1967 when the Aboriginal question was decided in the yes. So we've had 3 major amendments. 1, Aboriginals. 2, filling casual vacancies in the Senate, which happened in 1975. And the 3rd one, I've gone blank. Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. They are the ones. Now, they all, they didn't get up. They were proper questions. So we've had, out of the 8 attempts, we've had 3 that have made it. Sorry, I apologise. Those 3 did make it in the positive. And the other ones, the other 5, they were really minor things dealing with federal import duties and the actual
stamp duty and so forth.
They were administrative and financial. So our Constitution is very hard to change because, again, I remind you, you've got to have 50.1% of the Australian population agree, and then you've got to have at least 4 of the 6 states agree. And that's why, I realise for people they're passionate about, but I remind them the Voice was a noble idea, but you look, all 6 states said no, and 1 of the territories said no.
To me, one of I remember asking one of the politicians, and forgive me, I won't mention the person's name, but I just said, so what problem is it that we're trying to resolve by putting this forward, or if it comes to fruition, solving with this solution? And there was a long pregnant pause, and the answer that came back was the money's not getting to the right areas for the Aboriginals.
That's
and I thought to myself,
doubt.
well, so my thought then was, well, this isn't a discussion, a voice to Parliament. This is more a mechanical issue.
It is.
And we need to be dealing with it a different way. Turn that on its head, I'm looking at the amount of politicians who identify as Aboriginal. I'll use that term because I think the definition I think you said was 124th.
Up to 124th, yes.
And the Indigenous culture is very well represented in Parliament and in the Senate
and in all of Australia.
Correct.
Yes.
In governing roles. They do get a voice.
Well, they do, and there's 11 Indigenous Australians in the current Parliament. Now, the other thing that was not made clear, and it was disgraceful that it wasn't, that Indigenous voice would have 25 members. That's what it would be. There would be 20 of those would be like urban Aboriginals, people like Jacinta Price, Marcia Langton, all these others. 5 seats were reserved for full-blood Aboriginals in the remote areas. Now, again, none of us had a vote for it. It was only Aboriginals who would vote for it. Indigenous Australians, well, that's 282,000 people would have a vote. The representation I've just outlined was small, but here was the other problem. That body, though, also had to approve any spending or anything by the Australian Parliament. So that body could hold up the approval of AUKUS or whatever, and it would have to go to the High Court to be challenged. And you couldn't, I don't mean this in a rude or inconsistent way, you could not reside such power in a small chamber of 25 people.
No.
Look, the one problem we have, which we've got to get beyond, is race relations. And now, if you dare say any word against a First Nation, and which is a horrible term, it's a Canadian term. Our Aboriginal people were tribal. They lived in tribes. But if you say anything against it, you're immediately shut down as a racist. That's appalling.
I agree, David. So going back to it, we've got about a minute to go.
Yes.
I thought I'd give you a chance to summarise the Constitution and constitutional amendments.
The Constitution is a founding document of the Commonwealth of Australia. It sets out the administrative procedures between the states and the Commonwealth, and both of those bodies ultimately are answerable, that is, states and Commonwealth, to us, the poor little bleeders, who are called the electorate. Now, if you have an uneducated electorate, how many people have you met, Colin, who say, Constitution, know it backwards?
Not many.
No, you
not
don't.
many at all. And some of those people who have tried to read it completely misconstrue the entire thing.
Do.
I think someone came to me at one stage and said, I have a right to water. They can't sit there and have water rights or charge me for the water. I think it was something to do with the Murray-Darling at the time. Yeah. Because it says so in the Constitution. And when you actually read the article, it basically says that we all have a right to water and the government needs to ensure that we all have equal rights to it.
It doesn't even say that, but it sets out water is basically the domain of a state government.
Yes.
And so they must always be in conformity with the Constitution in their exercising of water rights. That person was right. Water belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong to Indigenous Australians or city Australians, but given its massive importance, there needs to be clarification when disputes arise, and at the moment the best one we've got is called the Constitution.
David Ashton-Lewis, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Colin.
You've been listening to 4CRB's interviews and talkback series. Support local online content and become a financial supporter today at 4CRB.com.